Hello everybody, this is Dongbek Sasang. You can follow me on Twitter at Dongbek Sasang and support me on Patreon. And don't forget to like and subscribe. This story is The Legend of the Torosdal, the Menace of Rural China. Don't say a word, it's trying to come in, Lena whispered from under the table. Her face was white as a ghost. Please tell me this is a joke. Tears were falling down my face. I have never been so terrified in my life. I can't believe this. It's going to kill us, she said. You could see the fear on her face. The round door handle slightly turned half a rotation, and it tried to stealthily enter. This door slightly pushed forward and jerked to a stop from the various locks and latches. Then, it knocked on the door. The knock was ever so slight. Like a meek and docile old woman was politely asking permission to enter. Lena and I were slightly weeping. We couldn't say a word, even if we wanted to. Then, it just started freaking out. It started pounding on the door, and the door shook violently. I could hear the creature thrashing about frantically behind the door. The latches and chains bounced back and forth on the large wooden door. It was enraged. It was going to break in one way or another. It was only a matter of seconds. My story is a sad one, like most millennials nowadays. I had graduated with a double major in English and psychology. I looked for a career for over a year, but really couldn't find anything better than minimum wage. I just got so fed up with the whole situation. It's even harder for women to make it in the workplace too. A lot of people don't realize that. My parents told me to go to university at all costs, and I did. But here I am, working minimum wage, living in debt and poverty. My parents were no help either. Apparently I was the failure of all the sisters because my oldest sister got married and became a stay-at-home mom, popping out 3 children. My other sister got a job as an accountant. I had an after-university life crisis because I realized I just wasted $100,000 in debt and 4 years studying a useless degree. It hurt getting no sympathy from my parents, especially when I had friends straight out of high school start as tradespeople installing pipes making $70,000 a year downtown. And here I was, 22 years old, $100,000 in debt, with a degree that made me unemployable for the only jobs I could get. The whole system is a sad joke. After a year of sending out resumes every day and not even getting one call back, I decided to just screw the whole idea of 9-to-5 mundane office work and actually go live my life. I would travel and explore and find an exotic boyfriend. The idea sounded good to me. I sent my friend a message who went to teach English in China after university. She told me that she was having a blast. She said China was a very safe country and the people were very friendly and curious to talk to her. Also, the food was phenomenal and their traditional culture was fascinating. She sent me a link to a portal website and I applied to a recruiter to get me a job in China. A week later, I heard back from the recruiter who said she could get me a job in Hunan province right away. It looked like a really good deal. The pay was pretty good and they were going to pay for my flight ticket. Also, I would be working in a public school. Maybe I could have a career in education or something, I thought. Maybe this could turn my life around. I honestly didn't care where I ended up. I was down for a crazy adventure and a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I was going to find myself abroad and be happy. I signed the contract and flew out the next week to start teaching at a rural public school in China. I was really nervous because I had never traveled to Asia before. I was not an outgoing girl either. After a long and tiring journey around the world, I finally transferred into Hunan province through a small regional airport. I was sitting on the bench in the airport checking my bags when another Western-looking person came up to me and started talking. I had my guard up. Why did this strange guy want to talk to me? He asked me what the heck I was doing in Hunan. I told him I was English teaching, and he said, "You should be careful." He told me he was fluent in Chinese and his German financial company sent him there to look into some potential investment projects. He told me Hunan was completely rural and undeveloped. Basically, a great opportunity for investments and development projects for his company. He picked up the local newspaper sitting next to us and turned to the ads section. He pointed to these distinct Chinese characters written on the paper and said they were hitmen for hire. He explained the region was so poor and underdeveloped they actively recruit hitmen and send them out everywhere in China from Hunan. I was pretty freaked out and wanted to leave China, but he assured me it was just the part of the criminal underbelly of the region, and China was a very safe and warm country. Also, people in Hunan were famous for their hospitality and generally nice people. I just thought every city has a dark and dirty underbelly that nobody really sees or thinks about. I just tried to forget about what that guy told me and focus on the good parts. I saw my fair share of craziness living downtown in a university town, so I could probably handle China. I soon figured out how to get a cab into town to find my apartment. I gave the cab driver a printed out address in Chinese. I had no clue what anything said. He read it and mumbled something in Chinese. He looked at me excitedly and said, "USA? USA?" He seemed very excited to meet somebody from America. He couldn't speak more than a few words of English, but he was very friendly and open to Americans. I'm glad, regardless of whatever government beef our two countries have, we as people could embrace each other with open arms. It made me feel safe and welcome in China. We finally got into the small town after about an hour's drive. It was okay because I could see the taxi meter price was a little under $30. I heard everything was cheap in China, but wow, to experience it like that was something else. He drove over a small wooden bridge into town. The town was utterly beautiful, like something out of a National Geographic cover. Words could not explain what I saw the first time entering the city. There were these red traditional style houses with pretty Chinese roofs all lined up along the river, tucked away in between the mountains. There were these short, flat-roofed red boats drifting along the green river. It looked like green tea. I almost burst out laughing. At that moment, I felt like I had found a piece of heaven. The river passed under a lavish traditional bridge that looked like one of the gates you see when entering a local Chinatown in your city. It was a remarkable scene, and for the first time in a while I felt joyful again. In front of my apartment was Mr. Yang, the principal of my school. I could see he was tall, handsome, and in-shape man dressed very professionally. He was very kind and helped me get into my apartment to show me how everything worked. He said I looked like a good teacher and showed me exactly how to get to our school. It was very convenient to get to work. It was just a short walk from my apartment. My apartment was on the second floor of a low-rise building and had new furniture and appliances despite it being an old building. Everything was looking good so far. The next day I went to school and met Lena for the first time. She said, "Wow, you're so beautiful with your bright eyes and white skin." She helped me a lot in the first few days of work, and we would often get dinner together after work with plenty of girl talk. After a few months on the job, I was starting to settle in and everything was going smoothly. I was really enjoying China. The food, culture, and people were great. But one day when I was walking to school, this old man with a long white beard was screaming, "Torosdal! Torosdal! Torosdal!" Because of all the commotion he was making, another villager ran and grabbed him from behind, covering up his mouth. He then dragged him into a nearby house. This was a big deal because in China the elderly are highly respected. The old man really scared the villagers with what he was saying. I had no idea what Torosdal was, but I thought he must have been a crazy drunk guy or something, embarrassing the villagers' pride and honor. I was anxious after that. It looked like he was kidnapped. I quickly got to school after being freaked out by the old man incident. I knocked on Lena's door and walked in. She was sitting at her desk, busy lesson planning, and I asked Lena, "What is Torosdal?" As soon as I mentioned that word, she jumped out of her seat and pushed me to the wall. "Never say that word again," she said sternly. She was really freaked out, and you could see it in her eyes. "Where did you hear that word?" she frantically said. I told her what happened, and she calmed down, but never told me what was going on. She just said, "Don't ever say that word again," and I left the room to go to my classroom. After that episode, Lena acted normal towards me, but you could see something was not quite right with her. Actually, everyone in the village seemed to be on edge from then on. Children weren't playing outside anymore, and people weren't going about their usual business. Something was scaring the crap out of everyone in the village, including me. Over the next few weeks, everyone in this whole town seemed to be acting even more strange. Everyone was just on edge. On my way to school or when I was grocery shopping, I could see everyone was looking over their shoulders and rushing around nervously. I must remind you that this is a small town. People were usually moseying around like they had nothing better to do, but something was different. People were acting funny, and it wasn't because of me. Over the next few days, I tried to talk to Lena, but she was really avoiding me. And every time I tried to talk to her, she would act very standoffish and too busy to chat. It was weird because we were good friends outside of work. I was actually feeling pretty down about the whole situation. I thought she was a good friend of mine that I could really trust. All she said to me one day was, "Don't come to school tomorrow. It's your day off." And something seemed really off about the way she said it too. I'm good at reading people, and she was definitely hiding something from me. When I was leaving school that day, I noticed the principal was going around to every window and meticulously checking the locks and putting boards up over every window. I walked by him, and he said, "Maybe there'll be a typhoon tonight." He sort of nervously chuckled to me, but I could see his anxiety. A maintenance worker was walking around to every door and double-checking each lock and ticking off a box on a clipboard. I was really freaked out by everything that was going on. I was going to run home and lock myself in my room that night, right after work. I didn't know why everyone was acting so sketchy. I was unfamiliar with Chinese culture and confused by it. This whole situation was escalating fast. I really didn't know what to do. I felt really worried. Walking home that night, the whole village was eerily quiet. Everyone's lights were off and nobody were on the dusty little streets. There were no street lights in the town, so the only light was the illuminating moon from the night sky. It seemed like I was the only person alive in the town. Something was seriously going on, but I didn't know what. I rushed into my apartment building and locked all my doors. Then, I raced over to shut the curtains and turned off the lights. I checked the weather forecast. It was supposed to be a full moon with clear skies. Bizarre. I waited an hour sitting next to my bed in lockdown mode. I don't know why I was doing it. I was just doing it because everyone else was doing it, and I was terrified. The sun was just starting to set, and the sky was lit up with orange and yellow textures peeking through my curtains. I crawled over to the closet and shut the door and hid myself under some blankets. Another hour passed. The sunlight peeking under the closet door was gone. I heard a knock on my door. It was a quick and rapid knock with a very shallow sound. I went silent in fear. Was somebody coming to kill me? The knock came one more time. I heard a voice from behind the door. "It's Lena! Open the door! It's an emergency!" I ran to the door, unlatched the deadbolt, and slid the chain lock out of the slit as fast as I could. Lena ran into the room, slammed the door behind her, and relocked everything quickly. "I'm so sorry." She was weeping frantically. "It's just, we didn't know if it was real," she said. "The legend of the curse said if a full moon ever lands on the 4th day of the 4th month of the lunar calendar, the Torosdal will come and ravage our village. The elders have confirmed it's true. It's happening tonight." I started crying as well. We were going to die without delay. She went on to explain the reasons for the ancient curse. During the Jin dynasty, Emperor Wudi declared all of Hunan to be under his reign. The people of Lena's village all rebelled against his Taoist law. The villagers put up a fierce resistance towards his rule, but eventually lost to his large military. The firstborn son of Emperor Wudi was killed in the battle to retake the town and was buried on the mountain next to the village. The legend said Emperor Wudi had the Changsha occultist curse their village. The story has been passed down from generation to generation for hundreds of years. The village elders had come to the consensus the day the Torosdal will seek revenge for Wudi's son is the 4th day of the 4th month of the lunar calendar, which was that night. The villagers have been fearing this day for almost 1,000 years, she went on to tell me. She finally said we needed to get to the school or we were dead. The thing would find and kill us. I peeked out the window. The tiny streets were lifeless. Every little wooden house lined up along the streets had its lights out. I think we literally were the only people left in town. Our plan was to run directly to the school, she said. I stole a key to get into the school. It's the safest place for us to hide. People were originally going to hide in the school, but everyone just left the town instead. I couldn't leave you behind. There's no way for us out of town. She was right. There was only one bus out of town in the morning, and she didn't have a car. Apparently there was no room left in the bus for anyone. The rest of the people drove out of town, leaving Lena behind. We needed to leave my house quick. My hands were shaking with fear, and I had this heavy feeling in my stomach. We slowly unlocked the door of my apartment without making a sound. We checked the hallway. It was empty. We ran down the concrete stairwell, out of the front door, and made it to the street. I pulled Lena beside me toward a back alley behind the wooden traditional houses on my street. I saw the alley many times on the way to school near my apartment. The narrow alley ran behind the houses and connected their open backyards with fences in between. Suddenly, we heard it. We both stopped dead in our tracks. We heard the sound of a long, drawn-out wail, similar to a bull echoing in the distance, then grunting, and heavy breathing, and snorting. Lena grabbed me and pulled me into the closest backyard of one of the houses. We ran across the small yard to the back door of a random house. Luckily, the door was open to the house, and we fell to the floor under the back window to hide ourselves. Fortunately, the town was small enough that people didn't lock their doors, but the wooden house only had one big room with a large window facing the backyard. There wasn't anywhere to hide. The house was rectangular and decorated with red ornaments and traditional pictures on the walls, with some Buddhist items scattered around the house. We were both horrified at the sound of the creature. Lena slowly crawled over to the back door, and I locked the deadbolt and slid the chain across the metal piece. She slowly crawled back to where we were laying under the window. The window was very big, so we were trying to stay under the windowsill so we wouldn't be seen. We didn't have time to move anywhere else in the house and couldn't afford to make any more noise. Then we heard another sound. It was walking around the alleyway. Each footstep it took, there was a distinct stomping sound, like the thing literally weighed a ton. Each time it took a step, you could feel the vibrations in the house. I thought everything was going to fall over in the house. The steps got closer and closer until it reached the house's backyard. The noises stopped. I had to see what it was doing. We couldn't just sit there like the prey we were. I crawled to the corner of the window and poked just an eye above the windowsill, and that's when I got a glimpse of the most horrifying creature imaginable. It was a massive, towering beast. Its skin was a dark red hue with matted dark brown hair hanging from its body. Its skin looked like rawhide. It had massive hooves for feet with a slit in between. The upper body was gargantuan and muscular, like the biggest bodybuilder you've ever seen was a shrimp in comparison. The beast was nearly as tall as the house we were in. It had two black round animal eyes filled with rage. Its head was narrow and extended at the front with a big snout. Its mouth was long and full of jagged teeth with filthy saliva dripping from them. Its tongue was lashing around in its mouth as it stomped around. Two thick horns were lodged in both sides of its head that curved in front of it like twisted spikes. The Torosdal was a monstrosity. It jerked its head towards the house, and I ducked down and signaled to Lena we needed to hide. I was so afraid it might have seen me. I couldn't forgive myself for doing that. The problem was, the house was a one-floor house with no basement. There was nowhere else to hide. I tucked myself in between two chairs against the wall, and Lena crawled under the kitchen table. We heard the footsteps approaching the house. The stomping vibrations were getting stronger as it meandered towards the house. Every step it took caused the pictures and ornaments to rattle and shake. The sound of low-pitched wailing and deep breathing lingered in the silent night. The sound of deep exhalations echoed in the alleyway. It was right in front of the rear entrance of the house. The door handle slightly turned half a rotation. It tried to stealthily enter. The door slightly pushed forward and jolted to a stop from the various locks and latches. Then it knocked on the door. The knock was ever so slight, like a meek and docile old woman was politely asking permission to enter. Lena and I were silently weeping. We couldn't say a word, even if we wanted. Then it just started freaking out. It started pounding the door, and it shook violently. You could hear the creature thrashing around frantically behind the door. The latches and chains bounced back and forth on the large wooden door. It was enraged. It was going to break in one way or another. It was only a matter of seconds until it smashed its way in. I heard it take a step back, and with one fast motion, it shattered a gaping hole where the door was supposed to be. Pieces of wood blasted all over the house. Pieces were hanging from the wall, and the roof sagged over the hole. It was furious, around the room, smashing holes through the walls, crushing everything it stepped on. Plumes of steam came from its nose when it exhaled. It stood next to the table. It knew someone was under there. It ripped the table up, sending it flying across the room. And Lena laid there, exposed and vulnerable. It raised its large fists into the air to begin pummeling her, when I heard some Chinese men screaming in the alleyway. Rapidly, the house lit up with glowing bullets flying through the wooden walls in just about every direction above us. Little chunks of wood were scattering everywhere throughout the house. Automatic gunfire rang out from the direction of the alleyway. The bullets were ricocheting off the hide of the Torosdal, and some were only penetrating skin deep. You could see little glowing specks in the demon. The beast roared as the men ran towards the house to take on the beast. A man entered the room wearing dark clothes with tattoos on his arms. The man was yelling at the beast as he shot it with his pistol. The beast was unfazed by the bullets. The Torosdal casually walked over to him and swiftly picked him up and whipped him right out the window. He crashed through the window and glass shattered everywhere into the backyard. The man didn't get up. He was out cold. A second man bolted into the house. He looked just like the first guy, same clothes, same tattoos. He aimed his Uzi right at the chest of the beast. Gunshots rang out rapidly while it jerked around in its hand and stopped. It was out of bullets. The monster's face tensed up in anger, and it easily picked the man up with one hand and tossed him at the wooden wall. The impact was so hard, the wooden beams shattered as the man went through them, and he laid motionless on the front yard. Long pieces of wood were strewn about the yard. 3 men entered with swords and hastily started hacking at the Torosdal, but the swords barely cut the skin of the beast. The swords just clanged off its leathery hide. A man ran full swing at the beast and slashed at its arm. The sword came to a full stop and the man jerked backwards. Little neon green blood oozed out of the slice like a paper cut. The Torosdal let out a roar and made 2 massive fists. With its mighty hands, it slammed both of them on the head with the bottom of its fist. They both crumpled to the floor, mortally wounded. The third man bolted away in fear. Finally, a man was standing in the doorframe, wielding a long, dark sword. It started to glow a faint blue hue. The sword was unforgettable. It was wide and lengthy, with a brown hilt and blade. It had Chinese characters in pairs of 2 running down the blade. It looked majestic, even royal. The Torosdal immediately picked up a bulky dresser and launched it at him. He dove out of the way, just in time before being crushed by it. The dresser smashed the wall and splintered into pieces. He ran to the beast and slashed him on the arm, and neon green blood burst from its bulging arm muscle. The sword was able to damage the monster. The Torosdal grabbed the man around his neck, and in the blink of an eye, the hand fell from its wrist, and the monster screamed. The man had chopped off its hand with lightning speed. Neon green blood was spraying out of the wrist like a fire hydrant. The Torosdal bent forward and rammed the man, sending him flying across the room. His sword went soaring to the other side of the room. The Torosdal came running towards the man to deliver a death blow, while he was screaming against the wall. I leapt towards the heavy sword and hurled it in the man's direction. I looked up and saw the beast standing still over the man. The back of the sword was sticking out of the back of the monster. He slowly pulled out the sword and cleaved the head straight off with one mighty swing. The monster dropped to the ground, and the whole house began to collapse from the impact. Me and Lena ran out the large hole in the wall right before the house collapsed. When the dust cleared, the man who saved us was standing in the backyard, facing away from us. His long silhouette rested across the yard. He had scruffy facial hair and unforgettable thick tattoos of Chinese characters running down his arms like the other men. He turned around and bowed towards us. We may be monsters ourselves, but this is our village. Nothing can take that away from us. We will always be the rulers of this town, he softly said. Lena later told me what he said in Chinese. He turned his back to us and casually strutted down the alleyway. He threw the large sword over his back and started laughing and said, "Thanks, Junjun." He slowly disappeared into the dark night, and we never saw him again. We didn't have time to talk or reflect on what just happened. We both just ran quickly to the school and locked ourselves in the security room. We ended up staying the night in the school on edge the whole time. We didn't say a word to each other. We didn't know what else would happen that night, but luckily nothing eventful happened. The next morning, I took the bus to Guangzhou and went to the airport. I got a standby ticket back home. It was pretty rough when I first got back. I had to work nights, bartending, and days attending lectures and studying in the library. Eventually, I did get my professional teacher's license and found my vocation in life as a teacher. I learned life is a struggle and hard work, ambition, and perseverance will always pay off. My time in China made me realize how much I love teaching and gave me the courage to move forward in life. Lena and I had kept in touch over the years, and she even came to visit once, but we never dared say anything about the Torosdal. Now I can see why Chinese people are so superstitious. Lastly, after doing some research over the years, I realized that those distinct characters on the man's arm meant that those men were likely local Chinese hitmen. Most of the hitmen in China have those same distinct tattoos running down their arms as the men did that night. The images are burned into my mind still to this day. Also, even more crazy was the information I found about that sword. After doing some thorough research in the Asian Studies section of the university library, I found pictures of the sword that killed the Torosdal. It's called Chunjun, from the ancient legend of the Sword of Majesty. I translated some news articles from the local paper online in Hunan. The translation was pretty poor, but from what I gathered, Chunjun was stolen from the Hunan National Historical Archives, but was later recovered anonymously. Lastly, according to a website that shows lunar calendar dates, the next 4th day of the 4th month will be in 20 years. Who knows what could happen then? If you like this story, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, this story can be downloaded from www.wherethekingsrest.com. It's part of a collection of scary stories called Demons Unite, which can be downloaded for free. Thanks for listening, and thank you for your support.